Hi, I'm Stephen Van Tassel. You're listening to Living the Wildlife, discussing all things related to vertebrate pest control as part of the Pest Geek podcast family. This is the disclaimer for Wildlife Control Consultant and Pest Geek podcast for the Living the Wildlife podcast. Always follow national, state, provincial, and local laws when using pesticides and or other control methods to manage pests. Wildlife Control Consultant, LLC, Pest Geek Podcast, Living the Wildlife Podcast, Stephen M. Van Tassel, or their or his affiliates are not responsible for followers' use of the information provided here. Hi everyone, Stephen Van Tassel here, Wildlife Control Consultant, bringing another episode of Living the Wildlife as part of the Pest Geek Podcast family. Glad to have you on board. I hope your week went well. We have a guest here, as you can see, but before we get to that, do take a few moments, if you would, to subscribe to the channel, ring the bell, and if you can give us a 5-star review, that would be great as well. If you don't want to deal with YouTube, we also publish the podcast over on Rumble. Just look up at Wildlife Control Consultant, and you'll get access to the podcast there. If you have questions, comments, criticisms, or perhaps even want to be on the show, perhaps you have a new product, a new technique, or something that's just making you mad, you can certainly reach out to me at wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com, wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. Well, today's guest, and we're really glad to have him, is Pierce Kennemer. He is I would assume, the president owner of Iggy Trap, and that's Iggy Trap of Florida, LLC, and that's IGGYTRAP.com is his website, and he is a specialist in trapping iguanas. Welcome aboard, Pierce. This is definitely, or rather, kind of a niche animal, but the way things are spreading, we might see them in other parts of the country as well. So talk about how'd you get into wildlife control, and definitely talk about your trap.
Absolutely. So we were working on this for a number of years here. I'm a graduate of Florida Atlantic University in Boca Raton, and that was really my first introduction to iguanas. Because I'm sure, as your viewers know, you tell somebody in Montana or Michigan or Massachusetts says, "Oh, I trap iguanas," everyone's like, "What?"
Yeah.
Everybody is totally perplexed. But down
Right.
here, if you're a South Floridian or you frequent South Florida, in the past couple of years, it's gotten really bad in terms of the population growth. So that was my first introduction, was actually on campus seeing these iguanas. And I was like, oh, this is so exotic and it's kind of cool. And people were taking pictures and whatnot. So I did some background research, and I then purchased a home and kind of was noticing them showing up in my backyard, and they were leaving droppings everywhere. And I'm like, this is totally gross. So I did some background research, found they're invasive species, and was started doing a little bit more in-depth research on not only the ecology of the animals, but where they came from, kind of the history of how this all got started down here in South Florida. So kind of where we saw that there was a problem, we thought there has to be a better solution to getting these animals under control. For those who don't know, there's a lot of non-native invasive species that are down here in South Florida. They happened by the pet trade back in the 1960s. So the green iguana is the most prevalent iguana down here. They're all the way from, they've been seen all the way up in Orlando area, all the way down to Key West. There's been spottings of them.
Central Florida south.
Yes, and they're almost kind of following the same trajectory as the invasive Burmese pythons, which have made a lot more news in terms of an environmental impact out in the Everglades.
Sure.
And so we're dealing with them. We're dealing with Argentinian tegu, which have concentrated populations really down in Miami-Dade County, as well as there's a pocket up in Fort Pierce where they were released a while back. And Florida Wildlife Commission's done extensive research on that population there, as well as Mexican spiny tail iguana, which as a trapper is a much more angry species to deal with. The green iguanas tend to be a lot more docile than the Mexican spiny tails. They hiss and growl and open their mouth and try to bite you. They're a really aggressive animal, as well as Nile monitors, which are really the largest of the invasive lizards down here. And they all pose a large economical impact, and as well as an environmental impact as well.
So let's talk about if you can sort of tease that out a little bit for those of us who are not familiar with it. So you talked about the droppings, which is kind of an aesthetic issue, but also can go over maybe into some disease issues, perhaps. But what are some of the other what are some of the environmental impacts and also economic impacts that you're referring to?
Absolutely. And this is kind of where we saw that there was an opportunity to be in sort of a wildlife control space for this.
Mm,
So not only are they, in just an invasive species, they tend to eat nickernut, which is our host plant for a lot of our butterflies and bumblebees down here. So we're seeing a sharp decrease in our butterfly population due to them eating their host plant. Um, and as everybody knows, once we start losing our pollinators, we start looking at crop decrease output, decrease of our crops down here. We have a huge farming,
right.
agricultural
Yeah.
business down here in Florida. Many people don't really know that. Everybody thinks of, tourism, boat parties, all that stuff. But we're
Yeah.
dealing with a lot of our crop output down here as well, down in South Florida, really west of Miami-Dade, out in Kendall. And we're starting to see a lot of iguana damage out there.
So they're eating this nickernut, Nickerenut.
K yes, I believe
Okay.
Knicker. Yeah, I
Okay.
believe that's how it's
Oh, all
spelled.
right.
But
Nickernut.
that's kind of like a one very good um sort of example of some of the environmental impacts. Um, as well as for a lot of homeowners down here, this is kind of where we saw a lot of opportunity is they love hibiscus, they love bougainvillea, they love a lot of the landscape flowers that people plant down here. So as you mentioned, as from the aesthetic issue, people's yards are just getting absolutely decimated. People are spending thousands on landscaping. It's getting torn up within hours due to these animals. Um,
The turf or just the plant, or the turf or the bushes and plants?
Bushes, plants, all are having issues with
Okay.
just getting chewed. Yeah, I mean down to the sticks. Just
Wow.
all the new tender leaf is completely gone in areas that are highly concentrated. But even more so, a lot of the environmental impacts down here, the economic impact that it's having, not only on single family homes, but on our infrastructure down here as well, is really starting to create a large concern.
What are some of those issues? Are they invading structures? When I looked at your
Yes.
site, you had because you have some tile roofs down there. It looked like the juveniles or just some new birth came out, like, or they were actually living in the roof. Or is that
Yes. So for single family homeowners, it's become a large problem due to that they could scale stucco. They can go right up the side of a house. But a lot of them use palm trees and other things to jump, and they get up on those clay tile roofs, which are very prominent down here, the Spanish style roofs.
Mhm.
They're clay, so they hold a lot of that heat. So they'll sit right up on those roofs and bask in the sun. Obviously, they're cold-blooded animals, so they're trying to stay as warm as possible. And the force of them, they actually can crack those clay tiles and they'll force their way under them. So we've been out with roof inspectors. Their nails will actually tear at the roof membrane, all that underlayment. They'll scratch all that up. We have people getting water damage. They're getting down in the attics. I
Oh,
mean, they're really aggressive up on rooftops. And what a lot of people don't know is down here, uh, iguanas are classified as in Florida as a pest. So
mhm.
they're in the same category insurance wise as roaches and termites and ants and anything else. So anytime somebody's trying to put in an insurance claim on the roof saying I have 20
Got
some
nothing.
iguanas,
Yeah,
they're kicking it back to the homeowner.
that's right. Yep. It's like a rat, it's your
Exactly.
responsibility. Yeah. That is amazing. So do they do the same thing with asphalt shingles, or is it just the Spanish tile?
The asphalt roofs and the metal roofs are much more sturdy in terms of dealing with them getting underneath the tiles
Okay.
and living up there. Now, what they do when they go to lay their nests or lay eggs, they actually burrow down into the ground. So they're a burrowing animal.
Oh,
So they'll dig tunnels 10, 15 feet deep. We've had buildings actually get condemned down in Miami of them getting actually underneath the structures and just having them be so far gone that some people just push away and say, we're not gonna, we're moving out of the building. We're done.
Undermining foundations. So that would also be, so if you have slabs, a lot of slabs down there, I would
Hmm.
suspect, right? So they could actually burrow underneath that slab and cause that foundation, that slab to crack because it's lost that. Oh my goodness.
So
Okay.
yeah, so the from a structural integrity standpoint, I mean, we see it happen at pools a lot where they could be near water and they'll get down in the pool plumbing. They'll find the edge of wherever either paver stones or like travertine decks and things. They'll just get under them and they'll follow it as far back as they can to wherever they want to lay their nest. And anytime you get heavy rains or anything else, which is very common down here,
Right.
we're seeing all sorts of issues from decks collapsing to seawalls going into the intercoastal. I mean, it's not an exaggeration. We had a water control structure up in West Palm Beach. There's actually a story on it. You could go find it. It was written by the Palm Beach Post. They had a number of iguanas that burrowed right next to the water control structure. So that
Yeah.
controls all of our overflow
Right.
to go out into the Everglades as well as going um, into our canals. And they actually had burrowed all the way down next to that and caused it to fail. And they had to shell out a $1.9 million emergency fix. And for a lot of taxpayers, that was the first introduction to saying, this we're just seeing the tip of the iceberg now.
Unbelievable. So this could, so you could have some dikes being undermined by this and cause them to collapse, sort of like uh, what is it looking for? A New Orleans type event that could occur with the burrowing that they're doing in these dikes.
Yes, in the canalways especially, because the canals are all publicly managed and there's nothing really out there.
Mm,
And it's all that loose sand, and that's where all of our runoff goes, all of our water control. And they get back, it's about 45-degree angle slopes, and they just get in there and they'll burrow 10, 15 feet back in these holes. The water level rises and that it keeps eroding. So we have
right,
homes that are, 15, 20 feet off those canals
right, right.
and they're rapidly eroding back due to all these iguana burrows. And they're laying anywhere from 50 to 75 eggs in a clutch at a time. And about 90% of those eggs are making it to maturity.
No kidding. Okay, 90% recruitment rate. That's a lot. And anything eats them? Anything eat them?
After 6 months, they have no natural predators. So from at 6 months, they're small enough to where, the occasional hawk or bird will get down there. But once they reach that kind of mature age, about, just over 6 months old, you start seeing that their only natural predators either me or the occasional car, and that's
Right.
really about it.
So at 6 months, what do they weigh? 1 to 2 pounds, 2 to 3 pounds? Where are they
A
at
little
that?
bit less,
Yeah.
but you're talking it's still going to be 6 inches plus long from nose to tail. Their tails get real long, and as you mentioned before we got on the show, they are wickedly fast,
They
and when they're
are.
small,
They
they
are.
are difficult for other animals to get to.
They are fast. Yeah. I had to, right. It's shocking. So it's interesting trying to chase them. They go up on what, their hind legs or something. I only had
Mhm.
one encounter, and it was enlightening to be sure. Yeah, it was amazing. So you so I'm looking at your profile, right? So you have a business background and as well as cybersecurity, and now you're in the iguana control world. That's quite a shift in terms of this type of work. So you got involved in this because you saw a need, you saw a problem, saw a need. And what gave you the idea for this particular type of trap that you've developed?
Yeah, absolutely. So when we were looking at how to think about how do we control the population, so the first thing that we kind of did a lot of research on is, okay, there's a problem. What are people doing right now to solve it?
Mhm.
And the only really thing that was available to the marketplace is a lot of people go around and they shoot them,
Mhm.
which can be effective. If you're a good shot and you can actually see what you're shooting, um, and if it's right in front of you. And now a lot of homeowners do that. It's works for them. It's a great way to just keep that population kind of cold. Um, and then the other thing was what I'm sure a lot of your viewers are familiar with in the wildlife control industry is just the single use, kind of trigger plate traps.
Right.
Um, and that there was nothing really specific, obviously, for an iguana. So a lot of the traps were specifically designed for raccoons or possums or other kind of nuisance wildlife that a lot of people around the country would be accustomed to. So we were
Right.
really trying to focus on how do we build something specific for this problem? How do we filter out the bycatch? How do we keep the raccoons and possums, which are prevalent down here just as
Mhm.
everywhere else, how do we keep them out of the cage? Because we were having lots of complaints of saying, well, I went and bought a nuisance trap, but I keep catching raccoons. I can never catch an iguana. Um, so we realized that wasn't really working for this market either. So um, believe it or not, my dad has a great background in design and some of these things. So I consulted with him. I said, hey, I think we can do something here, and we kind of bounced prototypes back and forth on what we wanted to do. And he kind of gave me some direction, saying, okay, let's try this out here. Maybe try this. So over about 5 different variations and just over a year and a half of design work myself down here, we were able to come to our production model, which you would now see on our website, which
Mm.
is at www.iggytrap.com. You can actually go see that and what we have available for purchase today and what we use out in the field for homeowners and businesses and HOAs and so on.
Right. So so it's a multiple catch trap, uses uh a one-way door
Hmm.
that seems to be sort of a push through door design. So what is the process for how you're trapping them? And so, but by that I mean, like, for example, when we're trapping, let's say, pigeons, typically there's a pre-baiting period, and then
Right.
you're kind of educating the birds to sort of recognize that they can push through the tines before you ultimately set it, so that the door doesn't stay open or whatever. Is that the same process for these iguanas, or is it a different process?
A little bit, and to your point, we're a multi-capture trap. So we recognized and said, okay, if we're gonna trap this, which we kind of recognized as the only viable, kind of catch-all way to do this, because we live in a very, very urban area.
Right.
It's not viable for places like schools or communities or public parks to have a shooter out there. That's not for 99% of cases, that's really not probably the best way to go about it, in my opinion.
Right.
So we were trying to look of how do we do it so we're catching the most we can, as much as possible, with the least amount of downtime. So we try to figure out, okay, if we catch in the single use traps, you hit it once and it's out of service. So it's going to be there. Whatever animal's in there, it's waiting for us to come get it.
Right.
So our trap is in service 24/7, 365 around the clock. So as many iguanas can want to go in the trap can go in the trap. Now it's good to note for your viewers that green iguanas down here are a very social animal. So when you see them, they eat together, they sleep together, um, they sunbathe together. You see them in packs. And they're really like that majority of the year until you hit breeding season, when some of the males start getting territorial and looking for mates. So what we've noticed in our testing is that when one iguana went into the trap or explored it, it kind of signaled to the others in the area, and they all just kind of started migrating towards the trap. So yes, it's similar to pigeons that it's common to see the iguanas kind of engaging with the trap
Yeah.
prior to going inside it, just to see what it looks like. But we've never had to do like a pre-baiting to where we wouldn't activate the trap. As soon as we set it, we've noticed that the iguanas come right up, they smell the bait, they go right in the trap. And once
Wow.
that first one goes in, it's kind of rocking and rolling from there.
So when you capture, let's say you use the residential size, because you have different sizes. You have the
Correct. Yes.
residential version, then you have the commercial version, then you have the large commercial version. Does that sound right? Right. So
Yep. Mhm.
different sizes for different needs. And so when you have, let's say you have your quote unquote full, or you come out there and it's pretty crowded in there, and do you leave, when you're dealing with green iguanas, do you leave a couple as seed, for any others that may be in the area, or do you remove them all?
We tend to remove them all. Down here, we there's a 24-hour mandatory trap inspection.
Hmm.
So in order to be humane as possible to the animal, we don't want to leave that animal in there any longer than 24 hours.
I see.
So if we're
Okay.
coming in the morning at 8 a.m.,
Yeah.
and we come back the next morning at 8 a.m., any animals that are in there, all the
You're gonna
iguanas or
remove them.
non-native
Okay.
lizards, we're removing them all. Once they stay in that cage longer than 24, we've noted, I mean, these animals can go without food and water for weeks.
Right.
So they're, most of the time you come up to the trap, they're just sitting there. They don't tend to flail themselves around
Mm.
or do anything. Once they kind of realize they're trapped, and they'll start looking for a way out, but once they've kind of exhausted their options, they tend to just to sit there, in our experience, and kind of wait for their way out. And part of that also is to the design of our cages.
Mhm.
Since they are larger, it's called, for an animal that is trapped, it can allow multiple in there. It's high enough where they can climb up on the cage. They don't feel like they're in crazily confined to where they start to get paranoid or get stir
Right.
crazy like
Right.
other animals do.
Now, I noticed you had a water bottle capability with the trap, and so that would be for areas with, because I'm assuming that these iguanas, you think they're going to be able to go farther north uh, than Orlando, or do you think that they could probably move to upper Florida, or you think the weather conditions are just going to be too cold for them to tolerate it?
It's interesting. There's a study out there that was done. Um, I wish I had it on hand.
Mhm.
I'd love to drop the actual study, but they noticed that over the course of the past few years, the iguanas have been able to tolerate only 2 degrees colder weather before they start having uh, the drop events to where they actually will fall out of the trees. Now, what we kind of deal with down here is anytime over 80 degrees and sunny, they're out having a field day. When it's down in the 60s, kind of 50s, 60s, they are not freezing, but they tend just to sit at the tops of the trees. Most of them tend not to fall, but they just sit up there and they wait, and they just try to conserve their body heat. They can go, like I mentioned, with weeks without eating, so it's no problem for them. But as you mentioned, once you kind of get down to those 40s, you start seeing the drop events where they will actually slow down, their muscle functions will weaken slightly, and they'll actually fall out of the trees. Now, down here in South Florida, we haven't had a kill freeze event, which they classify as where you kind of have a mass population kill event where we have sustained freeze temperatures for longer than about 3 to 4 days. That has not happened since 2010. So we've had over a decade now of kind of just leaving them being unchecked. Now they'll fall out of the trees, they hit the ground. Usually within a day, they warm right back up, they come back to life, and they go right about their day.
Mm. Wow. So do you think that if your rules were different in Florida, let's say they're moving into another state, let's say Alabama or Mississippi, do you think that the trap would work better if you were able to leave some Judas animals behind? Like what they do sometimes with pigeons is sometimes people will take a string and tie a
Mhm.
string to the foot of a pigeon that they're leaving for an extra day or so, and then they would come back. Of course, there's going to be water and there's always plenty of food, but then they will, that way the bird's not in there for an excessively period of time, but it's a Judas bird to continue to attract other members of the flock there. Do you think the trap would work better, or is it doesn't you haven't found it mattered?
See, I completely agree with your statement. Now, I would agree with you that it would probably continue to work better,
Yeah. Okay.
having other animals in there. See, now we've had with that trapping regulation in place down here saying all live animal traps must be inspected every 24 hours. I
Right.
get it, because you don't want to have a raccoon or an animal stuck in there for an extended period of
Right.
time.
Yeah.
But down here, the really only thing that people use the nuisance traps for is the single use traps,
Right.
which
Right.
don't have ample food, they don't have water, they don't
Right.
have space for the animal to move around. So it makes sense. Our trap is different. We have food, we
Mm.
have water, there's more than enough space for that animal to move around. And over thousands of hours out in the field, we have 99 like 0.9% uh rate of only catching iguanas.
That's
You know,
amazing.
I can count on my hand the amount of times where we've actually had bycatch. And normally times where that comes is the animal is either very, very small. So we had a kitten, a feral kitten, get inside, which is highly unusual, likely wandered in. Cats don't have sweet receptors on their tongues.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
we use a lot of tropical fruit. So it wouldn't be something they normally be accustomed to. And the trap is designed for things like rodents to pass through, native snakes like black racers and things like that pass
Mm,
right through, no problem. But you know, for us, it'd be extremely beneficial to have more time out there in the field for an animal that doesn't, you know, need food or water for 3 weeks, but still has it. And
right,
we do
right.
that for the public and as you know, as well as people that pass by and see the trap.
Sure.
But kind of one thing to really focus on here is for us to have a trapping operation that is desperately needed in this area for, you know, especially these Palm Beach, Broward, Miami-Dade County. It is necessary. We're getting absolutely overrun, but due to the regulations that are set, it makes it very, very difficult to make it or make it cost affordable for not only municipalities but also the general public to really deal with the issue. If it was, you know, checking every 3 days, you know, those are savings that we can pass on to local municipalities, HOAs, general homeowners. We've heard the saddest stories you'd hear of people saying, I don't have money to deal with this issue, but they're destroying my house.
Right.
I physically can't do it. Um, and it's been a really, really tough battle. And for a lot of people and trappers, they feel as if, you know, this is an issue that is just kind of being put by the wayside on at the state level.
Yeah, it's tough. It's this is one of my hobby horses. I'm a critic of a lot of associations in the wildlife control field that they spend a lot of time training and doing education, but they do exceptionally little time lobbying. And there is a tremendous need. And in fairness to states, sometimes states are reticent to do a lot in this type of to solve this type of a problem, because once they open up the regulations, they're afraid that the animal rights groups are going to come in and do some draconian measures, and then they lose more than what they had before. But
Right.
it's sad. It's definitely more complicated, but unfortunately, the wildlife control industry is not organized enough for a variety of reasons, and there's not enough interest to do this type of work, because it's obviously the poor people are going to suffer with it, as they always would anyways. Because I'm wondering, you know, I would think that your trap would would be useful for people using those remote cameras, to put
Hmm.
a remote camera up and to say, yeah, we're checking the trap, we're getting timestamps every day, but we're only physically visiting it when we see a non-target in there, or we're
Right.
doing it
Hmm.
every 3 days, but we're monitoring to make sure that everything's copacetic, they still have water, there's still food, because that's something that's of interest to me. Are there ways that the trap needs to be placed to make sure that the animals don't overheat or underheat, or do you have a strategy for how the trap is placed
Hmm.
to enhance the humaneness of the trapping technique?
Absolutely. And that was one thing we were also really, really focused on
Mm,
was we kind of pride ourselves with being really humane with this issue because again, it we kind of say it's a public-private kind of solution that we
right.
need in order for the public. And there's a lot of people, you know, that really like kind of seeing the iguanas, and they're not, as you mentioned, there's not a ton of education out there on kind of some of the problems that they're having. So we've kind of trained our team to know a lot about what we're doing, know a lot
Mm,
about the ecology so they can share that with the public when they
right.
are inevitably questioned or something like that. Um, but yes, we use many different methods. So one thing is we put a camouflage net over the trap. That tends to keep it much cooler. It breaks that direct sunlight. out of the trap. Now we do want to allow some of that sunlight to get in there,
Hmm.
strictly because the animal is cold-blooded.
Right.
So it's going to be most comfortable if it is warm. Um, Obviously, even cold-blooded animals can overheat.
Yeah.
Um, so we always kind of tend to put them in areas where, not number one, where the iguanas are seen and living and prominent, but we also put that camouflage cover over there to keep the animal from overheating. And it also looks a little bit better for associations. We can kind of work it in with shrubbery and
Hmm.
bush lines and things
Yeah.
like that. So it's not as big of an eyesore just thrown out there.
Oh, absolutely. So you make sure that the trap is not getting exposed to, full day sunlight. So you want to have it in probably like, because I see a lot of your sets here are typically shaded areas,
Hmm.
as well as which is where they're living. They're in the vegetation anyways, and you put your camo over the top. Are there ever situations where, aside from the human problem, say you're in an area where you don't have to worry about human interference with your traps, uh, would you have situations where you'd only cover half the trap so that the animal could then self-select if it wanted direct sunlight or if it wanted to be in shade, or do you always cover the entire trap regardless?
It tends to usually always be covered. Some areas
Okay.
will cover just the top of the trap. So
Okay.
as you know, as the sun kind of moves east to west, it'll kind of shine in on the sides there.
Okay.
We haven't had really much other animal interference outside of a couple instances. You will have the occasional rodent that will come in there and kind of check out the iguanas and things. Um, Kind of a little anecdotal story here. I was doing a I was doing one trap that I was kind of moving, and it was a busy day, and I was walking up to a trap at an association in West Palm Beach, and I'm curled around the trap, and I have we have a little tool bag that has our bait and our kind of tools to work on the trap. And as I turned the corner of the cage, about 4 feet away from me, there was about an 8 foot gator that was sitting up and looking at the iguanas inside the trap. And I spooked him, and he flies down in the water, and splash goes up, and
Yeah.
I'm like,
Oh,
I'm kind of walking back to the car. It kind of took a minute, and I'm like,
yeah. Glad
I'm
he was
like,
afraid of
okay,
you rather than the other way
yeah,
around, right?
exactly,
That's yeah, gators are gotta respect the gator. Just
yeah.
gotta
He
respect
was
that.
looking for a snack.
He was looking for a free snack, without a doubt. All right, well, let's talk. I want to talk about a couple of more things. One would be the baits that you would advise for someone to use in this trap, and then also how the animals are disposed of.
Yeah.
Okay.
So best thing that we've noticed, and a lot of wildlife trappers use a lot of the same things. It's non-citrus tropical fruit. So a lot of the things that are readily available down here, mangoes are great in the summertime months when the mango trees are fruiting. Bananas, papayas, tomatoes all work great. Kind of the normal fruits. Now, anything that's like a grapefruit or orange or lemons or limes, those that harsh acidity is a
Right.
little too much for them. They won't go for that. Hibiscus flowers work great. People use fake flowers with hibiscus oil. That's kind of a tried and true method for a lot of wildlife trappers down here. And all those methods work fantastic for luring the iguanas in.
Any pheromones, scat, lure, bodily secretions of any sort that would be of use, or is that
Um, they tend to not really be interested in that.
okay?
The I mean, them themselves, I mean, their secretion is crazy. I mean, their scat that they leave down here, as we kind of mentioned at the beginning of the show, it does serve a huge health risk for a lot of people. So the iguanas are known for diving down in public pools here, and there's always a video, seems on the 10 o'clock news, of somebody gets freaked out because an iguana jumped out of a palm tree and splashed into the pool. Um, but their droppings contain salmonella.
Okay.
So for a lot of people, that can make somebody very, very sick. Um, Now we've seen also with dogs, because dogs are a little bit um, a little less informed than humans on in
Yes.
terms of
Yes.
looking at their scat. So they just have dogs run over and they eat it, and dogs get really, really sick. Another kind of thing, I know it's a little off topic, but cane toads down here really have been serving a huge issue for dogs. People let their dogs out at night. The dogs go and munch down on a cane toad. Those cane toads secrete their poison, and dogs are
Mhm.
getting paralyzed, dying. It's become another huge problem down here that we're dealing with.
So is that going to be another trap idea for you? Because that certainly, are you working
Stay
on that?
tuned.
Oh, stay
Stay
tuned.
tuned.
Okay, you heard it here first, folks. So maybe there's another trap in the works, without a doubt. So no, that's very helpful. And the type of water, so because some animals can't use the drip bars, but it looks like I
Right.
saw you with the drip ones, where the animal has to kind of put their tongue up to it and kind of suck it out of that tube. So obviously the
Mhm.
iguanas are able to get water that way.
Yes, the
Okay.
drip tube works great,
Okay.
and we have that dish below to collect it, so it just kind of gradually will leak from the bottle. But that dish also collects rainwater,
Mhm.
morning dew, all those things. Funny enough, we've actually caught cane toads with our Iggy Trap.
Oh, there you
Um,
go.
we
Okay.
we have yet to consider that bycatch because
Right.
we
Okay.
kind of just
Right.
kind of cancel that out because it's still
So,
catching
so
something that's
that's
a
done
huge
for
issue.
that. That's just a freebie for the client. Then you just do
Oh
that one
yeah,
for no
exactly.
cost. Okay. All right. So how about, so you have so let's say you have 10 to 12 iguanas inside of your trap. What's the process for removal and dispatch?
Yeah, absolutely. So what we do is we treat them the same as other non-native reptiles in terms of the FWC, Florida Wildlife Commission code
Hmm.
for doing live transport of these animals.
Okay.
So when we're actually dealing with them, we come up to the cage. Funny enough, they'll freak out for all of about 10 seconds, and then
Yeah.
they'll realize that we're there to let them out of the cage. And on exception of the alpha males, who if you look up pictures and you see these big orange ones, those are the kind of the alpha males, which tend to be semi-aggressive animals. The green iguanas are, as soon as you grab them, they play dead. So as soon as you kind of get them behind their head, they're you can move them around and they're really
Mhm.
no problem to you. They're not trying to bite you or anything like that. So we use noose poles, which are very common in the pest control industry,
Yeah.
um, as well as for smaller ones. We even have technicians that will catch them by hand. We put them into double woven um, burlap bags.
Okay.
We put those into those bags. There's
Would a
enough
snake,
ventilation. So
would a snake sack be
yes,
suitable,
very,
or?
very,
Okay.
very
Okay.
similar.
All right.
So we put those in there, and then we place those inside of um, a kind of a similar basket to what you see on the trap. So
Okay.
it kind of is a larger basket there. They get placed in there, so when we're actually driving them to be euthanized off site, the wind was able to blow through there, keeps the animal
Keep
cool. The
cool.
animals aren't
Gotcha.
overheating or
Mhm.
overcrowded.
I gotcha. And then are you using carbon dioxide? Are you using pithing, or what's the technique for actual
Yeah,
dispatch?
pithing is right now is the current method of euthanasia that we're doing. It's the one that's recommended down here by our Florida Wildlife Commission as well as the Veterinary Society for the state. Is basically a captive bolt, which is very similar to what they use for euthanization of poultry things. It's just immediate loss of a brain function for the animal. So,
Okay.
it's not feeling any pain or anything like that. And what we kind of noticed is when we were talking about the euthanasia portion, which is obviously the most sensitive and delicate portion
Sure.
of um, the whole kind of process to what we do, we were really focused on okay, how do we do this the most effective and humane way possible? And we were kind of noticed that for a lot of people that shoot the animals, and there are other iguana control companies down here in South Florida or marksmen who have very good high grade air rifles and pellet guns to where they can take an effective shot
Mhm.
and euthanize the animal with one shot. Now, that is not always the case.
Right.
There's a lot of times where, if people don't have a high enough pressure air gun, or they're not as good of a shot, or even, everybody, every time you can't get a perfect shot every time.
Right.
And there's obviously a situation where you could injure the animal gets away, and, what happens next, you don't know. So we kind of wanted to minimize that as much as possible. You know, the last thing we want is a bunch of semi-injured animals running around or things
Right.
like that. So we try to focus, okay, what's the best way to do it? We realize the closer to the animal you can get, the more control you have of the over the euthanasia of the animal to make sure that it's um, as humane as possible every single time to kind of avoid some of those instances.
So just a caution to the audience here when we're talking about shooting, make sure that you follow all your local laws here because many communities air rifles are considered just like if it was a regular powder rifle. So make sure you're following all that. And of course, if you're around as Mr. Kennemer was saying, around schools with all the shooting stuff going on, you would better make sure that you're not out there in tactical gear and looking
Mhm.
like you're ready to shoot things up because in our society you want to be very careful. You don't want to cause an incident where if police think there's an active shooter going on, that can get dangerous really, really fast. So
Yeah,
and
I'll touch
that's
on
not
that
a
really quick.
absolute. So you make sure if you're shooting, there's a lot involved. There's a lot involved to it, and that's not our topic for today. But definitely make sure you're really legal,
Yep.
and that you're a good shot, as good in reality as you think you are in your imagination. Is how I
Yep.
like to say like to say
When
that
in doubt, call a professional. When in
without a,
doubt,
without a
call the
doubt.
professional. It's we've had a lot of instances down here in South Florida where city commissions have brought up the issue of shooting. There's people doing guided tours, going down canalways and they're shooting up into people's backyards. People's windows were getting blown out.
Oh my gosh.
We had in Lee County, which is up the state a little bit. They have a Mexican spiny tail population in Lee County. There was a guy who was within 300 feet of a school. He was hired, but somebody called it in, as you mentioned,
Right.
no gear, no, nothing that would have identified him as a iguana control person.
Right.
And they called in and had a school on lockdown. And we noticed that there had to be a professional way to go about that.
Right.
Best way what we do. Everybody is uniformed at all times. They carry educational material with them. So when they're approached, they have not only they're not only logoed with our company, but they have informational material to hand out if they want to read about it. We also carry ID cards. So every person's got an ID card and say, hey, if we're hired, my name's so and so. Here's my ID number. We were hired by this person, so they can be very communicative. It's being in wildlife control, sometimes you don't think about it as a
Right.
frontward facing,
Yeah.
to consumer kind of job, but it really is. And we really kind of pride ourselves on that education portion of it. So yeah, definitely in local laws and all those things are really important to get educated on.
So in terms of the process, so let's say someone wanted to purchase your trap and start offering these types of services as an add-on for their particular business. What are some pitfalls they need to be watch out? Are you charging, there's different models for how people charging by the animal, charging by the time, charging by, we've eliminated the number of animals that you have here at this given
Mhm.
period of time. How is you don't have to talk about actual pricing, but what is the philosophy behind how someone should price in terms
Absolutely.
of that?
So when we have two sides of our business. So we actually have service contracts with professionals that go out there and they have our servicing traps that are placed all over Florida in all different environments. And then we also have our online store side of our business for homeowners and local businesses that don't mind actually kind of doing it as a hobby themselves or as a service for themselves. Um, and we take it as there's no one size kind of fits all for this problem. So all of what we do for pricing for communities and things is all customary. So we customize it. We realize that not every community is going to have the same setup. They're not all going to have the same budget, and they're not all going to have the same severity of needs. So just as many of your listeners would probably resonate with, obviously you have some people where you need to deal with this right now. And then you also have preventative sides. So saying, okay, you don't have a problem now, but either your neighbor's having an issue or the neighborhood next to you is having a huge issue in their community. it's not a matter of if, it's just when. So making sure that we're being preventative and kind of building those relationships as well to say, hey, it's way easier for us to kind of defend your home turf rather than having to try to win it back from the
Right.
iguanas.
So you're trying to, it sounds to me, if I'm hearing you correctly, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that you really try to push a neighborhood types program as opposed to going to this individual homeowner's house with his quarter of an acre. Does that
Right.
sound
So
right?
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's a little different. So we do large neighborhoods where we realize, okay, a lot of the iguanas are in common areas. They're all by the clubhouse or the pickleball courts or whatever it might be, and we can manage those areas as well. So for large communities, we do that. Obviously, for small communities, and not every community is an HOA, we do individual property control as well. So just as people that do termites and preventative termites things, we do a lot of preventative things from tree wrap um, to other things, gutter blockers, things that we can use to make sure that say, hey, if when iguanas do come to your property, we're going to already be in place, so where you're not even going to have to deal with it.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up some of those other points, but before I get to those, personal protective equipment when someone is looking to extract the iguanas out of the cage.
Mhm.
What do you recommend that they wear? Can they just go in barehanded, or do they have leather gloves? Do they need to have
Well,
bite-proof gloves? I mean, that sort of elk skin level,
yep.
or
The best thing that we always kind of recommend for a lot of people that do it themselves or purchase a trap and they start doing it themselves in their backyard is say for some people they can euthanize them directly in the cage, so the actual contact with the animal is very very limited.
okay,
Um, so there's people that actually will use um, air rifles, which are a approved method of euthanasia by the state, but they're actually able to get up right on the animal
okay,
to make it as humane as possible.
yeah,
And that way they can just dispose of the animal from there. There's no actual live hand-to-hand interaction. What we use is the same thing as what a lot of electricians use, welding gloves.
okay,
Like you mentioned, elk skin. Those really heavy-duty gloves are really effective against green iguanas specifically.
okay.
Green iguanas' teeth, they're serrated,
Oh,
so they're great at tearing plants and things like that. They're herbivores, so they don't, they're not a huge biting animal. Now, normally, if you get them right behind the head when you grab them, they kind of just go limp. If you grab them by the tail, they probably will disconnect their tail to get away. Kind of a fun fact. You kind of grab one by the tail and you yank it. There's a good chance that you're going to be holding its tail and it's going to be running away from you. So they can actually, if they feel that they're threatened, they can detach their own tail to get away.
so you want to go for a behind the neck grab if you're kind of grab them. What about grabbing
Yep.
the thorax? Are they able to turn around and bite you?
Well, number one, if you grab them kind of in the body area, what
Yeah,
we've noticed is they will kind of wiggle and they'll jolt, and it makes the animal much more difficult to handle.
to handle. Okay, so behind the head is what you're looking for. I noticed that you're talking about. So in terms of the air rifle, do you have any specifications on the type of pellet or power that should be used for an air rifle to be an appropriate option for euthanasia inside the cage?
We use everything over 1,000 psi.
Okay.
Gamma has a large selection, which is what a lot of people use down here. Now, I'm not saying that as an official,
Hmm.
kind of uh, person. I don't think there's actually any regulation on if there is anything. I mean, there's people that use little Red Ryder BB guns from Walmart, and they
Wow.
go out in there and hunt them with.
Okay.
Um, so it's kind of a different for every solution and price range. There's obviously some companies that use some serious like backpack CO2 rifles to where they could get some serious power behind them. And a
Yeah.
lot of those people are hobbyists, and they kind of have connections that they've built with using those products, and there's
Okay.
sponsorship deals involved and all sorts of things like
I
that.
was referring in terms of the euthanizing the animal inside of the cage.
Right.
What type of specifications? So 1,000 psi. Do they need to be flat pellets? Do they need to be pointed pellets? Do you think, or is it
Pointed hollow point is good.
okay?
Um, but again, it's kind of all to the discretion.
of the
What
shooting?
we use, when we're recommending, we've heard from homeowners that that's worked well from them. We wouldn't be obviously be able to verify that because we haven't actually been there when homeowners are euthanizing them.
Right, right. I'm just wondering about terms of the concern of the pellet passing through the animal, and then it becomes a deflection issue off the
We have
cage.
not had that issue, and we haven't
Okay.
had reports of that issue. Funny thing about these animals is their heads are like as hard as a baseball. I mean, they are really, really hard
Oh
heads,
my
and that's kind of how
gosh.
they use to drive up and under those clay tiles to kind of pop them up and get under
Oh,
them.
okay.
I mean, you can knock on their head, and you know,
All
I
right. I did
mean,
not know that. Okay. Well,
yeah,
that explains. All right. So I didn't realize they're like that. That I didn't realize was that hard. So where is the target? How does someone identify the target for the brain when if they're shooting? Do they go to the back of the try to go to the back of the head and go
yes,
toward the
but yeah, most people
nose?
try to go kind of go straight through the side, try to sever the spinal. That tends to
Okay.
be
All right.
the most utilized way now. The most effective way, again, which is the what FWC recommends, is the captive bolt, because that's again you're pithing, so
Hmm.
you're 100% going to hit the brain
Yeah.
every single time. But again, that's something professionals use.
Yeah. And so and does the Fish, Wildlife, and Parks in your state provide literature on how that's to be done, or does the person have to search for that on their own?
Yes, it's on the website, and
It's on their
unfortunately,
website. Okay.
there's not. That's the kind of the other issue is the education behind the issue. There's a lot of people that know they're here, they know they're not supposed to be here, but no one really knows what's to be done. And there's a lot of people, granted, in they don't want to deal with things like this. They don't want to be troubled with owning a cage. They don't want to. A lot of people say, okay, I know that these animals have to be euthanized just as any other pest does,
Hmm.
but I don't want to be a part of that. And
Right.
so we kind of take all those concerns in, and we try to offer that solution ourselves to other people, because again, as I mentioned, when in doubt, professionals always is the safest option. When you're talking about animal safety, you're talking about community safety, you always want to make sure that you're kind of taking those things into account.
Yeah, so let's explore that a little bit. So let's say there's another a wildlife control operator in South Florida, and they say, I'd like to add this to my business. And could they call your company and become a contractor for your company, or do you only use your own employees? Do you have people
We
across?
haven't really we haven't explored too much of that yet. We've kept a lot of what we've been doing in house
I see. Okay.
to start. And we've sold a number of our traps to businesses and homeowners, things like golf courses, people that have staff to do it internally. There have been talks with other pest control companies, but again, for a lot of people, this is for a lot of normal pest control operators.
Hmm.
Um, Doing this wildlife control, I mean, it's a big step into a different sort of business. So when you're talking about having to build an operation to check traps every 24 hours, or trying to
Yep.
build the infrastructure to even purchase the traps and storage, all those aspects come in. So we haven't explored too much of that yet, but
Right.
I wouldn't say that would be, kind of out of the works. I would just say kind of, you know, come back in a couple months and
All right.
see what the answer is.
Sure. Well, who knows? So if you call, definitely people say you've seen it here on Living the Wildlife podcast. So I'm intrigued by your tree wrap.
Mhm.
So when I was looking at the website, talk about that tree wrap that you have for the assuming for the iguanas. Talk about that a little bit. Your tree wrap.
Yeah, so a lot of the iguanas roost in the trees at night to sleep. So they get up there because they realize that there's no predators that are going to be able to get to them up there. Again, they don't have any predators, but it's just how their animals are programmed. So
Mm.
they get up to the tops of the trees, keeps them off the ground, and keeps them up near the sun. So when that sun comes up, are the first ones to kind of get the sunlight. Um, and when they find trees that they like to sleep in, they tend to stay near those trees. They tend to return to the same trees almost every single night. So when animals are or iguanas are in an area, they tend to stay there. So we kind of realized, okay, how do so we could keep them out of the trees, but what's stopping them from coming back, to, takes over the tree. And we actually make jokes with our clients. We had a one large alpha male iguana, and that was his tree. And there was no one else sleeping in that tree any night. We actually put a trap at the base of the tree. He came down to eat, got caught in the trap. We removed him, and it was like open season. And so there was multiple males circling the tree, and they were getting ready to fight each other. And it was like, we
that
just
tree.
yeah, it's like, who, they're gonna fight for, either there was a mate nearby, and we made the joke that said, oh, they're fighting over the tree. But sure enough, 2 days later, another alpha male sitting up at the top of the tree. So somebody won it. Somebody won.
That's awesome.
So we were trying to figure out, okay, how do we keep them away? And the tree wrap is used by a bunch of companies down here. And it's just it's a clear polymer that's a self-adhering. It wraps around the tree, and it keeps all sorts of animals out of the trees. So not only iguanas, but it even keeps squirrels out and other things like that.
Really? So they just can't grip it, or does it have a stickiness?
Correct. So it's that slick polymer, and they can't dig their nails into it. So iguanas are incredible swimmers and climbers. They can swim like nobody's business, faster than you've seen, and they can hold their breath underwater for 45 minutes. So
45 minutes?
45 minutes.
Oh my gosh.
So we've had one of my technicians was out on a dock and walked up on an iguana, and he was gonna noose it from behind, and it jumped into a pool, and it just sat at the bottom of the pool. So I call him and I said, hey, we got to meet over at this property. Will you be ready? How you looking on time? And he goes, well, I'm standing here, and I'm chasing this iguana around the pool because it won't come up the surface, and it would just swim. There's a large pool, and he's out in the middle of the pool, and I go to do some, he swims over here, but he won't come up. So he obviously eventually, after about 10 minutes, was able to get in and get it out. But yes, they're incredible swimmers and incredible climbers. So they get into that tree bark with their long claws, and they'll just run up the tree so quick, and that's where they can hide in all that foliage at the top of the trees. So we said, okay, if we could keep any animals from entering your trees, that's a surefire way to make sure that you're not going to have iguanas that are going to live on your property. They might live in your neighbor's yard, but they're not living in yours.
Right.
So for a lot of homeowners, we do that as a preventative for people that are in either high density areas where there's a lot of iguanas, or people that have them now, or they have them, they have a tree that runs near their roof line, and they have iguanas that use that as a runway. They run up the tree, and they'll follow a branch over and hop onto the roof, and then they use that to go and sunbask. And then, we wrap that. It keeps them off roofs. It keeps them, out of the way from other areas, and resorts like it and things like that. It keeps them away from resort pools and hotel pools, things like that.
That's amazing. So you said it also works on tree squirrels. So we're talking about, what do you have? An eastern squirrel, fox squirrel down there? What do you have for squirrels?
Yeah, eastern squirrel, I believe. Don't quote me on that. But yeah, they tend to run up the trees, and it's funny, and we get calls all the time because people love watching it with their kids when the iguanas try to run up the tree. And it's funny because they act similar to where you ever see like a cat hit tinfoil, and it jumps up in the air and it gets all scared. It's a similar deal. They try to run up the tree, and they'll hit it, and they realize it's like hitting ice, and they won't know what to do, and they'll fall out of the tree.
Fall down. That's great.
They'll try 2 or 3 times, and then they'll quit.
Is there a particular height level? Because you probably want the iguana completely committed to the tree before so how high off the ground does it need to be placed?
It needs to be 3 to 4 feet up off the ground, partially because, again, if you just wrap the base of the tree, they're great jumpers. They'll jump off the ground up and over it.
Okay.
If they could get up. But once they're on the tree, like you said, once they're fully committed to getting up that tree, then there's nowhere for them to go. They can't jump over it from there.
And so it goes around so how large of a strip? So, I mean, a lot of your trees
varies.
It varies, so it can just cut it to length.
Yeah, so we have a lot of, obviously palm trees, which, your diameters in circumference of the tree is not very much, versus like black olive trees, which have massive trunks,
Okay.
where you're going to need, 100 inches plus to actually get around that entire tree to disable it from having any iguanas go up inside. So yes, it varies in terms of how much distance and
Gotcha.
wrap you actually need.
Well, I had one final question, and that was there's a product in the industry what we call a nose cone. And what it is a directional device that allows a cage trap to be placed directly over a hole. So if the hole's going down into the ground, you can use this nose cone. It has basically a 90-degree elbow that allows you to put that over the hole, and so the animal is forced into the
Hmm.
trap. It's called positive trapping. So in trapping, there's three different types of trapping: baited trapping, blind set trapping, which is where there's no bait. It just relies on you capturing like a two-door trap. The animal just simply walks through and gets caught. Then what's called positive trapping, which is where you're setting the trap in such a way that only the animal coming out of the hole is caught. That's why it's positive. You're
Right.
positively catching the guilty animal. And I was intrigued with, because when you talked about them living in they're creating burrows and creating nests under the ground to lay their eggs. Is there anything with your trap that you have so that someone could use your trap and they say, we know they're burrowing here, I could put the trap directly over the hole, and so whatever comes out of that hole we're capturing? Is there a is it designed, do you have any type of add-ons for the trap to do that?
We haven't put anything out uh on like our website for sale for positive trapping yet.
Okay.
Partially because there's a lot of the iguana burrows where they are burrowing, they're burrowing, number one, like I mentioned, the canalways are a huge area. It's like ground zero for
Yeah.
where all their burrows are happening. But those burrows are happening on a pretty steep slope.
Okay.
And when they're actually burrowed down, they'll dig multiple tunnels and it's a big tunnel system. So
Okay.
um, we're doing research on how best to kind of make that work for our trap because
Hmm.
again, we don't want to put that on a hillside.
Right.
And when you're trying to secure the trap, we do things like ground stakes, like a lot of other trappers use.
Right.
Because I'm
Yep.
sure, as in your wildlife industry, you're sure there's a bunch of stories of them being stolen and thrown
Oh,
in lakes. And
yeah, it's a people hate trapping, but they're always interested in what we're doing. So yes, it's
exactly. So
without a
yeah,
doubt.
we've been looking for the best way in order to actually do that. Now, what we've done for a lot of iguana burrows is we've actually done just straight up nest destruction. So if we actually see them, we'll backfill their burrows directly, collapse the burrows. That's going to disable the access to the eggs.
Hmm.
It's going to smother those eggs so they can't be tended to. And that again is taking away those eggs from ever hatching.
Right, from
So we've
reproducing.
noticed is that the nest destruction is the best kind of way to go about when we see burrows. We tend to
Okay,
not want to keep them open.
all right,
So for a lot of people, we'll say, hey, there's a burrow. We need to get this thing full, backfilled. Whether we use foam or other things to just make sure that's completely blocked off, and make sure that if there is any iguanas down there, it's not coming back out. And if there's
hmm,
any eggs down there, they can't be tended to and won't hatch.
I gotcha. So is there any type of exclusion material that prevents uh, iguanas from, let's say, burrowing into the side of let's say someone had an embankment or they wanted to try to protect their in-ground pool from being attacked? Do you use like half-inch hardware cloth that may be laid over the ground, or do you use like excluder fabric, or is there crushed stone size that would stop them from digging?
Yeah, crushed stone's tough for them to dig through. It's uncomfortable for them. Loose sand or pea gravel, they'll go right through.
Okay.
Um, a lot of people do use like hardware, like metal, kind of that we're kind of blanking on the word.
Hardware cloth mesh.
Yeah, the hardware
Okay.
cloth, the mesh, kind of the wire mesh.
Yeah.
A lot of people use to block off holes.
They use
A
what?
lot of
Half
homeowners do
inch,
that.
half inch,
Yeah.
1 inch,
Hmm.
half inch,
Yeah, about half inch.
and
Um,
galvanized, probably better.
yeah, probably. I
Okay.
would I would probably recommend that you probably want some galvanized steel. But a lot of people use that when they see holes under their house that they don't recognize. They kind of just try to patch it up so there's nothing getting under there.
Gotcha.
Um, but yes, we've seen tons and tons of damage from them. specifically with their burrows, trying to get under homes, garages, porches. It's gotten to be very, very bad.
Wow. Well, is there anything that we haven't talked about? We've covered a lot of material here on trapping of the iguanas. Is there anything that you'd like to add that we haven't talked about that you want to be sure that the audience knows and understands with some closing comments?
Um, I would say just any closing comments. Definitely stay up to date with us on our website. Um, if you have any thoughts or comments or ideas, um, reach out to us. We love hearing stories and anecdotes from people. They can contact us directly through our contact us page on our website. You can email me directly, give us a phone call anytime. Stay up to date with us on socials, Facebook, Instagram. We're on Instagram all the time daily, so we love to do our day in the life, all sorts of
Okay.
different things that all the things that we see. So if you're ever looking for something that's might brighten your day in the pest control industry that you probably won't see anywhere else, give us a follow on Instagram. You'll
There
get
are
some videos of us up on roofs and all sorts of fun stuff.
just say having visited the website, look at the gallery. There's a lot of photos there. It just it's just well, as someone who likes trapping, it's cool. I mean, it's just something different. I mean, who'd have thought about trapping iguanas? I mean, it's just amazing. That is so cool. Well, thank you very much. So we've been listening. If you've been just following us and following us here, we've been listening to uh, Pierce Kennemer he is the owner of the Iggy Trap. That's Iggyytrap, Iggy Trap of Florida LLC. And you can go to his website, the iggytrap.com. That's Iggy trap. TRAP.com. And so he has some equipment there. If you want to look at purchasing one of his iguana traps, because we need to manage these species, and I would suspect we're going to get more of them. And I'm just wondering whether the trap could be used for some other animals that maybe are beyond iguanas here, but definitely something different. So Mr. Kennemer, really glad to have you on the show. Hope you enjoyed it. So would like to and have like to love to have you back when you come up with some new equipment or some new techniques. We'd love to have you give us part two of what's going on with iguana trapping in southern Florida.
I got some great
Okay.
new things in the works.
All
I'm
right.
looking forward to next time. And
We'll
thanks so much
definitely
for the call, Stephen. It
will
was really
definitely
fun.
keep us in mind. So, well, everyone, you've been listening to Living the Wildlife as part of the Pest Geek podcast family. Again, you can reach me at wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com, wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. Do take a few moments, if you would, to subscribe to the channel, ring the bell, and of course, if you can give us a 5-star review, we'd appreciate it. Remember, this training is for those who are professionals in the wildlife control field, and this is why we get a little geeky. If you're a homeowner, you're welcome to be on board as well, but understand some of the techniques we're talking about here are often for professionals, but we're glad to have you on board. So definitely be careful and make sure you're following local laws, and always remember someone's probably watching. So make sure you're always using the best tactics and techniques for what you're doing, because even people like animals, so definitely be careful because you may get attention that you really don't want to deal with. So again, you've been listening to Living the Wildlife. Why do we call it Living the Wildlife? Well, because we want you to live the wildlife, not be the wildlife. Take care, everybody.